Today we're going to be talking about your sexual market value with Free the Animal from Richard Nikoley. He's got a website that's absolutely excellent. There'll be a link below in the description of this video. And let's get straight on to the interview.
Great.
Welcome, Richard.
And for Noah's guests, hi, I am Richard Nikoley, freetheanimal.com. And this is going to be a little bit different for you viewers because typically Noah is having guests on and he's getting their perspectives in their various areas of expertise or interests, what have you. But in this case, what we thought is we do a little bit of a split interview where I'm going to take the lead and interview Noah so that you get to see, well, what does he actually think in all these areas that is not quite when he's interviewing. He doesn't really get to interject that much. So it's going to be up to him. And then at a point, we're going to switch over. One of my big interests going back to about 2008 has been various dietary things, which began with the paleo diet, and it has evolved substantially, and I think it can meld right well together because we are talking about sexual market value, and of course, one big thing is improving your appearance, and the biggest way to do that is through decent dieting. So I'm going to start right off here with I've got some questions for Noah, and we'll just take it from there. And of course, his website is snv4.com, which means sexual market value 4K, which refers to K-selected people. Now, first thing we want to look at is what is sexual market value. I'm assuming we're not talking about a business plan for a house of prostitution. So, or are we?
Well, believe it or not, that is all, depending on the culture that you're involved in, that is all connected in the sexual market. But those are probably parts of the sexual market that most people, especially K-selected people, have no interest in. What it is that we all have something to offer the world. We have a market of ideas. We have a market of labor. We have a market even for friendships. All good relationships are reciprocal. Markets are reciprocal, or at least they should be. In a free market, you have to give value to get value. And we use the term sexual market and sexual market value because we have to give value in exchange for value when it comes to reproduction. So if we want to date someone, we have to give them some value in order for them to be interested in spending time with us or even interested in marrying us. And I think a lot of people don't like the word market in it because we've got about 150 years of left-wing anti-market propaganda. Our ancestors saw this a lot more rationally. I remember my great-grandparents talking about how you had to be careful to choose a spouse that had a value that would add to the richness of the family. So, and I don't mean economic richness necessarily, but that they would be healthy, they would be mentally stable, they would be emotionally capable of adding to the family. If you're a man looking for a woman, that she would be fertile. If you're a woman looking for a man, that he would be able to provide. And so I think our ancestors...
A sense of eugenia, right?
Yes, exactly. Most of our ancestors, at least if you were sort of middle class or up, were outright eugenists. They may not have known that word, but they understood about breeding. You know, everyone, nowadays we all live in cities. Very few people have ever been involved in the breeding of animals. Our ancestors, 90-something% of them were farmers. So yes, they understood the breeding of plants and animals. And they recognized that humans were subjected to some of the same forces. Breed low-quality animals, you get low-quality offspring. Even in your area of expertise in diet and health, don't treat your animals well, even if they're quality to begin with, you'll get low-quality offspring. So it's really just a rational and scientific way of looking at how we can maximize the value we're able to provide and how we can find someone with a compatible value so that we can have the best and happiest family life that we can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in term, just getting onto that idea of marketing again, would you say that one distinction that you could draw there to help people understand it is it's not as though it's just two people and you got to give value to get the sex you want. She has to give value to get the security that she wants. But there's lots of people,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody has choices. Some have a lot more choices than other people have. Very attractive women, for example, tend to have a tremendous choice. And a man can experience that, like, say, if he goes to Asia, for example, he can experience what it's actually like to have that where you have just tons of choices for you. So that's where the market thing comes in. It's like, you want that, but you don't have enough value to give, analogous to you don't have enough money to pay for that thing that you want. You got to settle for something else.
And of course, there's that Pareto distribution where
Yes.
you see a bell curve, and 20% of the men could have any woman they want, and 20% of the men on the other side of the bell curve couldn't get any woman.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
the so-called incels.
Yeah, there is
voluntary
also
celibates.
Yes, exactly. There is also overlapping sexual markets. Okay, so for example, most white people are not interested in getting into a long-term relationship with a non-white person.
Mm-hmm.
Statistically, in fact, most races would prefer to marry within their own race, and so there are sexual markets that are. They overlap because some people could be in both sexual markets. They're okay either way. Other people would only be in one or the other. Generally, and we'll talk more about what R and K is, but generally K-selected people aren't interested in marrying R-selected.
2.
Yeah, and vice versa. And this part of the markets, it's very complex, just as complex. Actually, it's probably the most important market in human history. And it's also the most complex market. We learn a lot about how to navigate the job market. We go to school for at least a decade, wherever you live in the world, sometimes almost 2 decades, learning about how to earn money. And we get zero education about how to navigate the sexual market. And in fact, we're pushed to be embarrassed to even talk about it in a factual way. We're promoted a kind of storybook. Just go with your feelings, and feelings are really important. There needs to be attraction and there needs to be feelings, but there needs to be a bit of sense in your navigation of the sexual market, or you will get burned. There's a lot of men going towards MGTOW because they're afraid
of
what women have become.
MGTOW. Okay, so let's stop and explain that.
Okay,
MGTOW, men going their own way. So what does that mean?
Well, what's happening is there's a couple of causes for this. Some men, they've been in past relationships and they're just no longer interested anymore. Sometimes, if they're older, they might just be at a point where they don't need a relationship anymore. Okay? In fact, if you don't need a relationship, you're more likely to get a good one. But what happens is they don't, in many cases, they don't understand how to manage the risks of the market sufficiently to be sure of getting a woman who's not going to burn them. Mm-hmm. And for those men, it's a lot more sensible for them to just stay out of the market, either until, if they're younger, their sexual market value increases until they have a better selection, they can choose better, or until they change their social group. If they're in a very R-selected social group, they'll change over to a K. We can talk about that later. But and also, too, if they have some current issues, they need to deal with those first. So if they have anxiety issues, or if they are very naive and vulnerable, they need to be very careful. And for those men, there's an instinct. Men have a very good protective instinct, and they're going to want to stay away from women. And there's a lot of attacks against the MGTOW movement, and I think using MGTOW as a lifelong strategy is only good for men that I mentioned in that bottom 20%. If you're in that bottom 20%, you can't get a good woman. You're probably better off with no woman. But the problem is if enough men try MGTOW, that's the end of civilization.
Yeah.
And for many men, simply a basic education in how women in the sexual market work means that they can deal adequately with it and find a good woman. There is a shortage of good men out there. A lot of men are far too effeminate, far too lacking in assertiveness, far too
soy boys.
Weak. They're weak, not
Soy
just
boys.
physically. Exactly, they're soy boys. They're soy boys. They are psychologically weak. I mean, the physical weakness of the soy boy is a reflection of his psychological weakness. But this is fixable. Men can fix this in themselves. The older you are, the longer you've allowed that to happen, to progress, the harder it will be to change. But if you're in your 20s, it's not hard to fix it in a year or two. To the point where I've seen men, if you see the pictures before and after, you can't even recognize it's the same man. Everything has changed.
I've seen that a couple times. In fact, just a brief interjection. Back when I was going to the gym a lot, when I lived in town and it was 5 minutes away, there was one of the trainers, not my trainer, but another trainer. He's the most effeminate guy ever. I'm like, how can he train anybody, right? He was pretty tall, though, right? He ended up going to a different gym out in Los Gatos. It was like an iron pumping sort of gym. I ran into him in the store like 6 months later, and he was there after a workout with a pack of beef jerky and a quart of goat's milk. And he must have put on 25 pounds of lean. Yeah. And he looked great and carried himself completely differently from that point. So that's what I thought of when you said that, how a guy can actually really get rid of some of those effeminate characteristics.
And it wasn't the change of gym that changed things. It was when you went to a different gym, there was a different culture in that gym. There was different kind of men in that gym. The men in that gym didn't tolerate his effeminacy and didn't reinforce it. And that will change men. Men become like the men they associate with. If you want to become a better man, be around better men. In fact, if you want to get a better woman, be around better men, because women are lousy judges of men's value. They look and they go, what do men think of this guy? Okay, that's the opinion I will adopt as well. So they take the value judgment of the male hierarchy as the value of the man. Okay, that's how they get their market signals. You know, we know how much to pay someone. If you're an employer, you know how much to pay someone, because if you pay them less than that, nobody decent applies for the job. Right. And if you pay them more than that, your costs are so high you can't run your business. So somewhere between there is what you should pay them. Women take their signals from the market from how men react to other men. This is why we talk about effeminate men. A lot of these are raised by women. That's true. Women do have a significant burden in that regards. But once they're adults, men choose to continue to be effeminate. You know, if they're 18, 19, their parents are mostly the influencer. They get into their 20s, they got to go out and turn into men. They have to seek out what's necessary to turn themselves into men.
And so many dudes now, unless you're like in the Midwest, they're not ever involved with anything like, hunting trips and fishing trips or working on the car, doing heavy chore stuff around the farm or property, all of these sorts of things. They're head down in their phones all the time, which is that's just an enormous. I hope that jumps the shark at some point.
I've met lots of women. I have clients that tell me, I liked a lot about this guy. He makes a lot of money. He's tall. He's relatively good looking. But I shook his hand, and it was like shaking a girl's hand. He was so soft and effeminate. And even though he was 90% of the way there, that lack of masculinity, You can't make up for that with money, even with good looks. I mean, you can look pseudo masculine, but women, they can tell the difference. If your body's not relatively hard and you don't look like you've lifted anything with your hands and you don't have some calluses, that's a pretty big negative. Especially to women nowadays. We have a unstable society, and women are keenly aware that men are going to have to do manly work pretty soon once again. And I don't necessarily mean gardening. I mean, we're going to have to be protectors once again. Women are keenly aware of that, especially K-selected women, and they're looking for men that are masculine and capable of looking after them when things aren't good, when shit hits the fan. So, yeah, if you're a guy, there's no substitute for masculinity.
Yeah. Take him out shooting. Take him out to the range.
Shooting out at the range. Some combat sports are good as long as you're not getting brain damage. Too many punches to the head aren't good. It is important for men to enter voluntarily into situations where they suffer a bit. That could be camping. That can be long hiking. That can be physical exercise where you push yourself to the limit. But we need to test our limits, and we need to suffer without complaining. That develops a lot of masculine capacity. Even things as simple as taking an ice cold shower. As cold as you can handle it. If you have a place where you can go and jump in a frozen stream, do it. This is make sure you have a way of getting warm.
You're talking about one of my favorite things there.
Yeah.
I love to jump in stream. I used to have one of those big feeding troughs in my backyard. 150 gallons. Just fill it with the garden hose. In December, January, April, it's about 45 degree water. I started that at the first gym I was in. They actually had a cold plunge. So they kept it at 45 degrees. Oh, that's great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just a physical response. It actually changes you psychologically. It changes your immune response. It's even good for which we'll talk about later, for your digestive health, because it stimulates release of certain hormones that are healing to your whole entire body. But yeah, that kind of suffering there's a reason why the most advanced cultures all come from cold places, whether you're in the East or the West.
Okay, let's move on here, and I'm going to combine the next two because it's kind of like a matrix of things. You've got the common. Maybe you can explain what an alpha is and a beta. And we always talk alpha male, beta male. Then we can integrate with that with the R and K, or rabbits and wolves, if you will, so you can explain all of that and how the alpha, beta, and R and K mesh for both men and for women. I think because we always say the thing, and also there's also this talk about. Tell us what is it? A sigma. What is a sigma?
Well, let's start with, I'm going to very quickly describe what the difference between masculine and feminine is, which is absolutely ridiculous that we have to talk about that. But with 150 years, and feminists have been blurring the lines.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah. So the masculine characteristics are things that are always appreciated in men and considered a serious fault when they're missing. That's strength, physical, mental, emotional, moral strength, courage. Physical courage, of course, the ability to protect their family, that kind of courage, but also the moral courage to speak the truth, even when it's unpopular and when it can have serious consequences. Mastery, that means that when they do something, they do it well. They take what they do seriously. They're masters of something. As well as honor. This is the reputation that other men have within a male hierarchy. These might sound familiar to some people. Jack Donovan wrote an excellent book about this called The Way of Men, and he describes why those four characteristics are so important for men. And it would take hours to discuss that. I recommend men read that book. For women, femininity is the things that are typically associated with an ideal woman. So that'd be fertility and an understanding of how to please men. That should rankle the feminists. It's very important for women to understand how to please men, and the fertility includes their ability to take care of children. Birthing them is not enough. They have to be able to take care of them as well. So if a woman
they should nurse,
nursing the babies, stimulating them intellectually, stimulating them physically. You know, kids need lots of touch, hugs, kisses, foot massages, things like that, help to stimulate their psychological growth to develop into a proper person. Children that don't have that kind of contact with their mothers are about the same as children abandoned in an orphanage in the way they develop. There is serious, and we see this now, so many weak people, the snowflake generation. They weren't touched enough by their mother. They weren't held enough. Their mom didn't talk to them or look them in the eyes enough. And now they're afraid of everything.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
And then there's the helicopter parenting thing, which is that sort of nurturing or
it's attempt to control,
but misdirected, into orders and stuff rather than the security of closeness,
And that's a lot to do with the fact that ideally women will have quite a few children. And what used to happen is they'd have a kid every 2 or 3 years. So by the time the first kid had two younger brothers, he'd be roughly 4 or 5 years old, and he had to be completely independent because his mom had 2 younger kids to look after. She only got 2 breasts; she can only feed 2 at once. The 5-year-old, now he goes off to be with dad if he's a boy, or help mother look after the children. And so kids had a lot more responsibilities from a younger age. They were given the opportunity to be independent and grow up. Whereas now, if you only have 1 or 2 children, you can treat them like they're 3 years old until they're 30. And we see that happening a lot, Kids that still live at home, not because it's a great way to save money, but because they can't live on their own. It's right into the 3rd decade of life. It's very difficult to even imagine that.
And then you add to that the fact that there's so many single parent families, and also that people don't commonly live. Well, I suppose I don't know what statistics are, but it's quite common that grandpa and grandma live on the other side of the country. I grew up 100 yards away from my maternal grandparents and a mile away from my paternal grandparents.
Yeah.
So I had grandparent, and all 4 of them lived into their 80s until I was in my 30s when they started dying. So I had a lot of grandparent influence.
Yeah, it was a similar situation. I even had some of my most of my great grandparents around. And and their siblings as well. Their siblings, my great aunts and uncles, I guess you'd call it. And the advantage of that is you see, you don't have one example of masculinity and femininity through your parents as your example. You have dozens. It gives you a kind of roundness to your personality that you don't get with a very small, isolated family. And I think a lot of young people are missing that. They try to fill that in with an obsession with television characters and fanciful, with entertainment. And it's not really a good substitute for real people.
Mm-hmm. So alpha, beta, sigma.
So what an alpha is it's a man who has those masculine characteristics in abundance. And he's at the top of a hierarchy. You can be an alpha in one hierarchy and a beta in another. True. So you are still, though, an alpha when you go to the other hierarchy. It's just you're not acting as one in that hierarchy. Now, an example of this is...
You're being what you need to be.
Exactly. So if you have a group of special forces soldiers, usually they're in groups of 5, one of them there is the chief. He's the head of that group. He's the alpha in that group. But I defy any of you to go up to the others and call them betas.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So they accept the leadership of that alpha in that group. They go home to their families, and they're the alpha in that group. They go to other social circles they're in, and they're the alpha in that group.
just like in predator packs, I suppose at a point, there's split offs. So the established alpha in this pack stays there, and then one of his lieutenants or a couple of his lieutenants go off and form their own pack, and one of them's going to be the alpha of that one.
Yeah, and in chimpanzees, which are much closer to a human, they're much more complex social hierarchy, much closer to humans. Usually the alpha is not the strongest male. He's the male that's best at socially organizing the group to get the most out of the group. And he spends a lot of time taking care of other members of the group, preventing fights from happening, encouraging people to work together cooperatively, and creating his network of the betas who help him manage the group. That's very important. The other beta males help him manage the group. And it's not him that gets all the women. It's him and those beta males that work with him get all the women in about equal measure. And yet, being the alpha shortens his life significantly. If you're an alpha in a group, it's extremely stressful. Your cortisol levels will be raised about the same as the bottom of the pack men who don't even have they don't even have a real place in the pack will have about the same raised cortisol as the alpha, because he's got to be really worried and concerned about everybody in the group and their welfare. There's some studies done about that, and I will link those below, that show how difficult that job of being alpha is. And for many men, we can't be the alpha in every single group we're in. It's wonderful to be the alpha in some groups and then go to a group where you can relax a bit. And that there's some guy's got your back. Somebody older and wiser than you is there to help you out. And as a man, when you're around those kind of men, you become a better man as well by kind of an osmosis, and the fact that part of what they're going to do is make sure you're not the weak link in the group. They're always going to be helping you upgrade. Now the betas.
So now then, how does this all mesh in with the R and K? I guess the way I view the whole R and K, people say rabbits versus things, but to me, it's more like the folks are R's that are more short-term looking, short-term gratification, like the rabbit. It's just
the concept of preference.
We're just going to eat it. We're just going to eat it and reproduce and eat it, reproduce. Whereas the K is the forward-looking, save for the winter type. Can't be. We got to be careful. We have to plan for contingencies and so on and so forth. So with that said, go ahead.
Yeah, it's really easy to identify them in when you meet them, because there's this time preference difference. So rabbits are selected people are very short time preference. So they want immediate pleasure, as you said, and the K selected, they're more concerned with the long-term strategy. But it's even beyond that. It's also a quantity over quality issue. The R selected, they gather in herds, and the K selected are packs. What's the difference in that?
Packs.
Well, a herd is an undifferentiated group of animals in which there is no hierarchy. It's essentially a chaos of animals staying together, and they survive by sacrificing the weak members of the pack. Mm-hmm. And usually that means the young and old. The K selected, on the other hand, they're in a pack, so it's a much smaller group. There's a strict hierarchy. Quality is more important than quantity, and they survive by supporting the weak members, so making sure the young ones get the best education they can, grow up to be as strong and as competent hunters as they can. And generally, K selected, they have bigger bodies, they are more intelligent, they have large territories. If you're open borders, I'll guarantee you're an R selected. If you're like, no, I want this border and like 50 more between me and the other people, you're probably K selected.
Is it safe to say? How much of a generalization is it to say that women tend to be predominantly R, and dudes, well, at least used to be before the soy boy revolution, were predominantly K. You had to be, you were working on a farm, you were working in a factory, you were busting ass all the time. The dirty jobs, as Mike Rowe says, or the dangerous jobs.
My specialty is Western European, North American culture, so white people culture. And in white people culture, we didn't tolerate R-selected men. So men that were interested in promiscuous sex and not taking responsibility for themselves tended to get hung. We did that a lot. And so we weeded them out of the population.
For years, I've had the saying that, well, back in rational times, the guys would take that boy out hunting, and he
fell in the swamp. We just saw his hat. We brought his hat back. Yeah, there was a lot of calling going on in Western European society. It wasn't that long ago that duels were an acceptable part of Western society. They were considered honorable. There was a strong preference put on taking personal responsibility for your actions, and even taking responsibility for the actions of men you chose to ally yourself with. And the society has become more R-selected, and we've lost that. As men become less K-selected, women follow our lead. And since women tend to take whatever they see and amplify it, they see a small amount of stress, they'll amplify it to a lot. You give them an inch, they take a mile. Because of that, they've gone even farther.
Take and eat it too. You're hitting on some of my pet peeves here, or.
Well, it's interesting. The K-selected.
It is what it is, right? It is what it is.
Female nature is female nature. There's obviously some benefits to it, or it would have been weeded out of the genetic pool long, long ago. And it's a matter of seeing on balance how it needs to be managed. Western European women, the culture evolved over a few thousand years to behave in a certain way. So with highly K-selected men, women actually were very, very harsh on other women. Women don't like women that sleep around.
Right. Yeah.
Like they're more harsh than men. When a woman wants to reform, men will forgive very easily, especially if she's attractive. We'll forgive very easily. Women don't forgive that. No, you're out. You're out of the group. You're out of the tribe, and you never get back in. Men will accept that. Men will. We see this in the Weimar Republic changing over as women went from being the entire culture was very corrupt, and women were accepted when they changed their behavior. Were accepted very easily back in by men. It was much harder for women to accept other women back in to the group. So as men, we set the tone for the culture, and when we abdicate our responsibility to set that tone, to be patriarchal, then we allow women to behave to excess, to whatever excess they're naturally inclined to behave to, and that's destructive to society. So we can say it's female behavior, but we allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
And we allowed other men to intimidate us into allowing it to happen as well.
Now, the anything more to say about the R and K? I think that.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the really big things too with this is the different views of competition. R-selected, they don't like competition. They want an unlimited resources. So you will generally see people who are attracted to concepts of unlimited resources. They're attracted to the idea of a paradise with unlimited resources, or to a government that can provide them with unlimited credit. That tends to really appeal to R-selected people. And in environments where temporarily resources can be made unlimited, R-selected people will reproduce rapidly.
Yeah.
And K-selected, we love competition. We love how competition affects us. We'd rather lose a competition than not have one at all. And so since the sexual market, like any market, is highly competitive, our K-selected people, we generally tend to have some pleasure out of that competition. And if we allow it, to mold us a bit, it will make us better men as well.
Right, right. Yeah, and if we were going to we could maybe someday have a political, we see how all this relates into politics, right? Because as you were talking there, I was thinking, in terms of political structure, democracy is you couldn't have anything more designed for our selected people than democracy.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why K-selected people they prefer a different sort of a hierarchical thing where the people who do shit are in charge.
Yeah.
The property owners, the business owners, the employers.
Well, we'd like a competitive hierarchy to decide what we do with the commons, whereas our selected want the herd to decide what they do with the commons, because the herd is easily frightened in the direction that certain members of the herd want to scare it into. And so it gives them also, if you think about it, if you're one of those men that's on the far left of that bell curve and your quality is pretty low, or a woman that's on the far left, do you want competition when you know you're going to lose repeatedly? No.
Right.
One of the best ways to make men more conservative or K-selected or manly is to get them to lift weights and work out. Testosterone injections change men's political viewpoints. So it's definitely the better quality of man you are, the more likely you'll be attracted to that K-selected behavior.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I think we've covered this, a lot of this. What I was going to ask, and let's see if you have anything more to add, is what's a male with low SMV and high SMV look like? Can a low SMV male become high? Same for females. So if there's anything you think of that you think you want to interject, since we've had this R and alpha and beta discussion.
Well, the main thing that lowers a man's SMV is lack of masculinity. If he's masculine, if he's competitive, and if he's in a male hierarchy, everything that is deficient about him will improve. You can be a beta, that's not a problem. You can be a beta and have a happy family where you're the alpha within that family. But if you aren't connected with other men, if you are not masculine, your sexual market value can't be very high. And it doesn't matter how much money you earn, and it doesn't matter what kind of lifestyle you can offer a woman. She doesn't want a weak man, a feminine man. And for men that have a high SMV, it's the masculine characteristics, the assertiveness, the mental and physical strength. Everything else comes from that. Higher incomes are usually a result of these things. Men who get married, for example, they tend to become more masculine because they have a woman around them all the time to play off of if they're happily married. And the result of that is they often earn more, especially if their wife takes a very feminine role. So men who have wives that take a feminine role, stay at home, look after the house, dress nicely, and take care of them, those men earn a lot more, between 20 and 50% more than men who's basically marry a woman with tits. If they marry a woman with tits and she's going to be almost a man like them, their income is a little bit less than single men.
Or spending, doing nothing but spending money instead of being, back in the day, there used to be a class in school that all girls took, home economics.
Yep.
Right? Because it was kind of his job to go out and earn the money, but it's her job to make the best of it within the household.
Well, and for women, I mean, the low SMV woman is, as you get older, as women get older, their fertility drops. So, of course, if you're looking to have children, I mean, if you're an older man, you're not looking to have children, that might not be an issue. But if you're looking to have kids, that's an issue. Woman with massive amounts of school debt, that's an issue, because if you're going to get her having half a dozen kids, she's not going to be able to pay that. You're going to pay it. Okay? So that's a cost of marrying her. That's going to lower her value. A woman who has been with a lot of men, I talk to some very masculine, secure men, and if they're dating a woman that's been with a lot of men, it's very natural for them to have anxiety about their past sexual exploits. And we also know statistically that if you marry a virgin, you almost have no chance. Your chance of divorce is approaching zero. If you marry a woman that's had 10 or more partners, it's approaching 100%. So this makes a big difference. Women, there was a woman recently. She said that men are looking for debt-free, no tattoos, virgin, and feminine.
Yeah.
Fit and feminine. There's an excellent book. If you're a woman and you're not sure what to do to raise your sexual market value, the advice I give and the coaching I do for women is largely based on this book. It's called Fascinating Womanhood, and it really helps women to understand what they need to do to be fascinating to men. There are lots of beautiful women. There are lots of them. That's not enough. You can't just be beautiful.
It's not.
Yeah, you got to know how to make the man you're with a better man than he is. And the best men, they want the woman that's going to make their life better.
Okay, so that's a great segue actually into what's next. And let's talk specifically about your coaching. So obviously, when someone signs up with you for coaching, you're going to want to assess whether it's a male or a female. What's your split in terms of clientele, male to female? Is it?
I have slightly more men than women, but
Okay.
it's probably about 40-60 at
It's
the.
probably, rather than being a coach for just men or just women, because this is always giving you perspectives to bounce off. Like you see these problems, and then it crops up on the other side, either one way or the other. So that's really good.
I know more about women now than I did a year ago, and a year from now I'm going to know even more. And that's great. You think you know everything until you spend 20 hours a week talking to women about their relationship problems. And then you really
know, the less you know, right?
Yeah.
Or the less you think you realize, the less you know.
The more you realize they're all like that, the more you realize they're all like that, and the more you realize that they're all like that in different ways.
Okay. So you're going to get a client, you're going to assess them. What kind of questions are you going to ask them? Are they different for men or different for women, to kind of get your idea of where their SMV is? Because a lot of these people you probably do in video, so at least you can get body language a little bit. It's much different than meeting face to face.
Well, I can tell everything I need to know about someone within about 10 seconds of looking at them. But I still ask them a bunch of questions because there are some specific details I want to know. Usually I ask very simple things. So how tall are you? How much do you weigh? What's your diet? What's your sleep routine like? What's your exercise routine like? These are pretty basic stuff like you'd get if you went to a doctor, the basic intake questions. And when I'm asking that, I'm less interested, although I am interested in the specific answer they give. I'm more interested in their reaction to the questions. So if I ask someone about their diet and they are embarrassed about their diet, now this is going to blunt the effectiveness of this process a little describing it, but it's okay. Because people can't really hide how they feel about things. They think they can, but I've been doing this for a long time. If they're embarrassed about their diet, then I know the problem isn't a lack of dietary knowledge. There is some psychological block to them living a healthier life. So I don't need to tell them how to eat. I need to work on the block. And that skips weeks of asking questions to figure out what the block is. I immediately know there's a block and I can go to that. For a lot of people, I will ask them the last question usually I ask is, what do you want out of coaching? And that tells me a lot as well. So if they have no clue what they want out of coaching, what they want is direction and help. Because they don't know what direction to go in, they want direction. If they have specific things they want to accomplish, so I'll write that down. I had a client recently, he says he wants to do something transcendental with his life, something that changes humanity. And so
not just himself.
Not just himself. He wants to do something that makes humanity better through his work. So that's wonderful. And that's incredibly attractive to women as well. So he'll get everything else he wants. All the money and fame and women that he wants will come out of his doing something that will truly change humanity. So these are important questions, but what works down to it in the end is the most important question is, do you love yourself or not? Very few people, and I reject about a third of the people that come to me for coaching because they're not far enough along yet to even help them.
So a healthy level of narcissism,
yes,
or something.
Yes, you can't love other people till you love yourself. Now, narcissism is an obsession with yourself. It's right. You can be, the difference between love and obsession is it healthy or not, as you mentioned. So, Do they love themselves? And if they don't love themselves, they will not eat a healthy diet, no matter how much they know about diet and exercise. They will not exercise. They will not dress better. They will not go out and meet people because they don't love themselves. And if there's a lot of people in bad relationships that come to me with help to get out of that relationship, and I have to get them, there's a chain reaction. Love yourself, then you'll get angry about that relationship because you're being treated poorly. And it's not love yourself even in the moment. It's love yourself next week, your future self. Have love and empathy for your future self. Don't let your future self be treated that way.
Okay, so you said that you take a pass on about a third of people who seek out your services, and so is that you mentioned also before that what's more important than the answers to the questions are how they answer them or how they react to them. So I guess that because what I was going to ask is how do their answers to these assessment questions weigh into their potential improvement? So you're saying that for about a third of people, whether they answer the question, it's just that mix, and it's like there's just not enough potential here, and I don't want to feel like I'm taking your money.
Exactly. Right? It's partially potential, and it's partially, are they honest? If they're trying to deceive me, which they can't do because, maybe the best liars can do that, but I've been dealing with crazy and narcissistic and lying people since I was a child. So I'm used to dealing with that, and I can see right through them. I may not know what the truth is, but I know they're trying to deceive me. If they're trying to deceive me, if they're not being honest, they're uncoachable. So I'm looking for their level of coachability, and I'm looking for, is there potential for them to grow? If I was a basketball coach and a person who was 5'3" came to me and said, I want to become the next Shaquille O'Neal, I would say, well, that's great, but you can't. Sorry, I'm not going to take your money to coach you for that. Okay? Right. If a person is, 60, if a woman came to me that was 60 years old and says, I want to get married and have kids, I'm not going to give her false hope.
Right.
Okay? So I have to be careful not to give people false hope. It's a professionalism thing. But also, I need people that can be coached, people who will be honest with me and with themselves, and they have to have that some desire to change. They're not coming to the coaching to pay for a placebo to make them think they could change in lieu of actually doing anything.
Any big differences? Well, of course, there's big differences. What are maybe two or three big differences off the top of your head? The difference between coaching females and coaching males.
This is a great question. So, when you give women a suggestion, women are very easily influenced, almost too easily. So, I give women a suggestion, they do it. They almost don't even question it. They'll just go and try it. Okay? And that means that they can have extremely rapid progress. So I have women that went from not knowing any good men, never really dating, not having any experience with that whatsoever, living in terrible conditions, and like 4 months later, they're dating a extremely high quality doctor, tall, good looking doctor, in just a few months. because they listen to the suggestions and apply them immediately. The problem is if you miss a session or two, they'll fall all the way back to where they started again if they're not careful. There's not that long-term. When they get gains, they don't lock them in. Now, men, on the other hand, it takes a lot more sessions of coaching to get a man to change. The first step is he will intellectually recognize there needs to be a change or a different behavior, or he'll to do something. And then there's a few weeks while he decides to actually do it. And then once he does it, though, once he incorporates a new pattern into his life, it's there forever. So if they start working out, it's there forever. It's extremely rare they're going to stop. And that's the difference between coaching men and women is you can think you're getting really rapid progress with a woman, but you got to keep it up really regularly. With a man, they go away on vacation, they come back, they go right back to their routine. They're solid. Cool.
All right. So now we had before we actually started the recording, we were talking a little bit about online, and I thought, well, we need to get going because this is good stuff. So we were talking about the whole online dating thing versus real life engagement, and I was telling you that my own self, I very much dislike the online stuff. I tried a couple apps and got into some conversations, and then it's like this ridiculous text bullshit. Presumably, you're within maybe an hour's drive of one another. So my view is like, look, 5-10 minutes. If you don't have time to like actually have a meeting done, right? So what is what's your views on this? And I'm sure a lot of your clients use the online tools. So what's your insight?
Yeah, most of my clients do online dating either as their primary method of meeting new people or at some point. So for women, it's different than men. So I have women that put up, if they're an attractive young woman, they will put up an online profile, well-structured online profile, and they'll put it up just before they go to bed. They wake up in the morning with 1,000 men messaging them. That's not an exaggeration. I actually mean that. So, and those are men living close to them too. The problem with that is if they were to reply to each man and it was to take them a minute to reply, they would spend their entire life replying to messages. And so what happens is they will not reply to 99% of those. If they're getting too many messages, we have to work to adjust the profile to turn off men they don't want, or limit the geographic scope. But they basically look through it and they see what man says, hey, I live near you. Let's go on Wednesday on a date at such and such a time at such and such a place. You up for it? Those men have a pretty good chance of getting a date. Out of that 1,000, they're lucky if a single man assertively asks for a date. Out of 1,000 men, maybe one man will assertively ask for a date. Maybe. In general, if you tell a woman...
Hear that, ladies? Hear that? There you go. Hear that, guys?
Yeah. You tell a woman...
That's great.
You tell a woman on Friday at 8 o'clock, I'm going to such and such a... Friday at 8 o'clock, I want to go to such and such a place to have dinner. If you let me know where you live, I'll come and pick you up and take you there. Can pick you up half an hour before that at 7:30. Women almost always will say yes.
Yeah.
The reason being is nobody asks them. And I'm talking attractive young women who are like great photos on there and everything. Wonderful profiles. Guys just don't ask them. Guys will type, hey, that's it, 3 letters. Hey, or we should go out sometime. Or they'll do things like call them, you look cool.
Yeah.
No. If you like a woman, she's hot, not cool. It's
hot, not cool. Right.
Men have no online text game. They just don't have online text. They don't know how to do it.
Oh, I'm bad at it. I'm awful.
Yeah.
Now, and that's why. But I go out and talk to people. But I go out. I have a rule that every day I have to talk to at least one person that I've never talked to before, and out and about, post office, grocery store, whatever. I'll just strike up a conversation about anything. And the thing is, it's I don't care whether it's a young person, old person, man, woman, fat, skinny, ugly, hot, whatever. And the thing is you if you do that and just talk to people, that and don't. And not be like targeting. Oh, I see that girl. I've got to talk to her. Just talk to anybody. Actually, what's cool is striking up a conversation by someone standing next to a hot girl, right? And she overhears you, right? So anyway, I just think
that's the perfect technique for in real life meeting people. And honestly, if I was single, which will never happen, but if I was single, I would almost certainly not do online dating. Because I know so many people, I would work my network. If I was single, everybody I know would know it, and they'd know what kind of woman I wanted and what I expected from her. And if they knew someone that was fit with me, they would probably set me up because I've done so many favors for so many people that I have social capital that I could spend looking for a woman. That's why it's so important that what you're doing, you're out there getting to know people. You're out there making people's days pleasant, creating social capital for yourself around you. And that's powerful. I remember walking with my grandfather around where he lives, and everybody knows him, and all the young girls were super friendly to him.
I had it. My mother's father was the kind of I'm really not sure the description, but it's the dirty old man, but in a nice way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He loved flirting with young girls,
and young girls
even
love
with
that.
His wife standing right there, and it cracked her up because he did it in such a tasteful way. Right?
And if you're a young man and you know a guy like that, listen to how he talks to women. He's been doing it way longer than you have, and he's mastered it.
Let's because we're getting on in time here.
Yeah.
So let's do this now. Obviously, no, you can't take on the whole world as a client. So what would you say? What are 2 or 3 things a female and 2 or 3 things a male could do to enhance their sexual market value?
If you're a man, there's 3 things you need to do. 1, get into a male hierarchy with men that are better than you. Okay, you're going to have to be a little bit humble and go and somehow serve that hierarchy in order to get in. We used to have all kinds of social organizations. We don't have as many anymore, but we are, the rise of masculinity is really happening right now, and there are a lot of groups that you can join, and I won't specifically name any of them because I don't want to endorse any of them publicly. But there are all kinds of groups you can join where you can get into that male attention group where men will make you better men because otherwise you can't stay in the group. The second thing is get physically strong. Lift weights, eat right, look after your gut health, get punched in the face occasionally. It's good for you.
Yeah.
And earn more money, but that'll probably happen if you're in those other groups because you'll just become more of a man. You'll earn. If you have a job and you suddenly get fit, you're almost certainly going to get a raise. It's all my clients have had raises between 20 and 50% in the last year. All my male clients, sorry, the women not so much. That's not their goal.
See, it's an investment. It's an investment, right?
You'll get way more out of coaching than you put in. Way more. If you're a woman, be attractive and be feminine and respect masculinity. Treat men with honor and respect and value them, and men will trip over themselves to find you. A woman who really loves masculinity and really understands men and how to make men feel better about themselves, that woman is precious. There's lots of good-looking women, like I mentioned. There's not a lot that know how to talk to a man in such a way that he feels like he's a better man around her. In fact, he feels like without her, he's less of a man. Yes. Very few women like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Cool.
That can compensate for defects in looks. if you have that. It really can make up for it.
Okay. So, hey, your choice. Do you want to continue on with the dietary stuff where I'm going to talk, or do you want to save that for another session?
I would love to, in a very roundabout way, we can try another session again later.
Okay.
But I'd like to say I'm getting more and more young male clients who are, they're earning good money. They've got a good life laid out ahead of them. But their parents got them into a pattern of bad eating, and they're overweight, and it's really hard to figure out what to do. When you're a couple of kilos over, it's fine, but when you're 50% over what you should be, and you have a high body fat count, what do you do? Like, where should you start, especially for men? Where should you start looking about making those improvements to your health?
Well, the going back, so just as a little bit of a history, so I was like 50-ish pounds over in about 2008 when I said, better do something. And I stumbled on a guy, Art Devaney, evolutionary fitness kind of thing, and I was already a blogger. I'd blogged since 2003, and I'm very prolific as well. There's 4,700 posts on my blog now. So I start writing about it, and I went to the gym, and anyway, so I kind of evolved into this sort of a paleo sort of diet. Mark Sisson's a friend of mine, and Rob Wolf as well. These are two of the guys out there that have really done well over the years to keep pace with the change rather than be intransigent and say no, because there's a lot of things. Now, it worked. I took off 50 pounds, and I believe you told me that you did well with a paleo sort of.
I was on the verge of death, literally.
Really?
My teeth were so loose I could have just plucked them out. My skin, I was all swollen. I'd lost almost all my muscle tone, gained a lot of weight. My skin was so weak, if I pinched it, it would rip. My hair, most of my hair fell out. My vision got really bad. Yeah. Basically, I was dying. I couldn't get out of my joints were so swollen I couldn't close my hands all the way. And it was extreme allergies to anything processed. I was eating what you would call a healthy diet, what your doctor would probably prescribe, which will kill you, but just slower than junk food. And I was dying. I had one month I couldn't get out of bed for anything but to go to the washroom and shower. That was all I could get out of bed for. And I just got married, and it was terrible. Thank God I had a good wife, or I wouldn't have been able to stay married, because a lot of women wouldn't accept that. They just leave you. So I found first I realized that it had something to do with food, because when I just stopped eating, because I kind of gave up, so I just stopped eating, and after a week of that, I felt better.
You felt better?
Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay, this must be diet. And my mind started to clear enough that I went online and found Mark's Daily Apple. And that saved my life.
Great.
Like, Mark saved my life, literally.
That's good. That's great. He's a good guy, and him and Rob Wolf, and there's a couple of others, but just to cover, I wanted to cover how some of this stuff, because you're talking about the guy and what can they do? What's this guy who's just had bad eating habits and so on? And his problem is that he eats too much too often, and that's a bigger problem than what he's eating per se, right? When you talk about what you're eating, rule number one is protein rules all. So decent and lean sources of protein, right? That's rule number one. And I have a rule of thumb. What is your target weight? Like, so say you weigh 200. but you should be about 160, right? So I want you to eat 160 grams of protein a day. Absolutely. More if you can, on average,
Eat for the body you want, not the body
What?
you've got.
I'm sorry?
Eat for the body you want, not the body you've got.
Yes, exactly. So get that 160 grams of protein. The reason why is it's the most satiating of the macronutrients. Also, when you start getting up to that levels, there's what's called thermal effect of food. So you actually, they say there's 4 calories per gram of protein. When you start getting up to 150 plus of, grams of protein and or above 30% of your 30 to 40, 50% of your total calories for the day, you're really only getting the benefit of about 3 1/4 of the calories. So that's really where the only metabolic advantage is. So always the protein, it's satiating. You get a little thermal effect of food. Now, in terms of all the other stuff, if you can handle grains, fine. If you can't, if you're better with them. Some people are, some people aren't, but it's not a big deal. They're not going to make you fat unless you overeat them. Low carb, high carb, doesn't matter. But the thing is that if you're eating low carb, then you can have higher fat. If you want to eat higher carb, then you have to eat low fat. They have an inverse relationship, because look at nature. There are almost no foods in nature that are both high carb and high fat, right? The high fat foods are low carb.
Oh, you can't have everything.
The high carb foods are low fat. Now, here's an interesting thing too, is when you mix them. Let's use the quintessential example of a baked potato, right? With loaded, they call it in a restaurant, right? A loaded baked potato, loaded with butter and sour cream, right? Well, here's the difference. Well, not only are you getting tons more calories with the fat, and remember that fat has twice as many calories per gram as the other, and is the least satiating of the macronutrients, right? So if you eat that potato just with some salt on it, salt and pepper, maybe, spread a little ketchup, who knows, whatever you want on it, and eat it that way, you will have a certain insulin response. You will have a certain blood glucose response spike, which is normal, and it will take a certain amount of time for it to come back down under 100, and it will take a certain amount of insulin, okay? So take that same potato, you add the fat to it, and low carbers say, well, it blunts the response. Yeah, so you don't go to 140 or 145. You only go to 135. But here, what they don't tell you is that it takes twice as long to get down below 100, and takes 4 times as much total insulin to get down below 100. So, and you can use. There's all kinds of examples like that. You keep away. So the quintessence, almost the big problems is, the donuts, the sandwiches that are loaded with mayonnaise and bread and put avocado on it, put bacon on it, a fatty sort of meat. So you put all these things on it, and what you make is not only a calorie bomb, but you make something that's low in satiety and high in calories. And so you're ending up going to eat more, because ultimately you have to have a calorie deficit to take off the weight. It's absolute. And you have to have a calorie deficit.
And I'm not even sure if blunting your insulin response is such a good thing, because there is some connection between having that insulin spike and a release of testosterone and other hormones. Now, there's a difference between a spike and a constantly high insulin because I eat a potato every 2 hours.
Acute versus chronic.
Yeah.
Right.
We as humans seem to do pretty well with acute anything. Like you can get awfully cold and have no negative health effects. You try staying less cold than that, but for 2 hours and you die.
Yes, hypothermia.
Yeah.
So here's another thing on that issue in terms of acute chronic. blogging all these years and 110,000 comments on the blog, I get these low carbers and the keto people, um, and I have a group on Facebook called Richard Nikoley's Keto Tard Chronicles. If anyone wants to look that up, I'm kind of my personality. So, but here's the deal. So people are like, they freak out if they get a blood glucose response of like 110 or 115 from eating something, right? And up to 140, 150 is perfectly physiologically normal, right? So it's kind of, I liken it to someone who's a total couch potato. He lives in an apartment building, right? Total couch potato, never exercises, overweight, da 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 da. Lives on the 5th floor. One day the elevator breaks, so he has to take the stairs. And he gets up to the top of the stairs and his heart's going at about 300 beats per minute. And he says, "Oh my God, I can't handle any exercise," right? And it's exactly like that, because what these low carb, the ones who go chronically low carb and never exercise that physiology, right? They develop what's called physiological insulin resistance. So in other words, because your brain has to have about 120 grams of glucose per day or you die, you can go a little bit less after some training. So you got to get it either from diet or you have to make it from protein. It can be dietary protein, but if you're not eating enough protein because your fat intake is so high, then you're going to be using muscle tissue to make the glucose needed for your brain. But anyway, so in that sparing mechanism, your body becomes very adept at guarding glucose. So it makes you insulin resistant so that you can have elevated glucose for the brain. That's why people like chronic low carb. I did low carb for years, and my fasting blood glucose in the mornings were always like 110, 115. It's very common. Fasting levels where they should be 80 to 90, right? A week on a potato-only diet, and my fasting blood glucose was 70 to 80, right? So you recapture the thing. But so what happens there is when you develop this physiological insulin resistance, and you go out and you splurge, you have a Coke or you have a piece of cake or you have something high carb, right? Now you test your blood glucose and you're like over 200, which is technically a pre-diabetes diagnosis.
Now you're gonna die.
Because you should only go to 140 to 150 before your insulin hits it. But you have insulin resistance, right? So that's the sense. So now we go back to that couch potato deal where you don't exercise, you have to use the stairs, your heart rate races out the thing, and your conclusion is, oh, I can't handle any exercise. And so the conclusion of the low carbers in this scenario is, oh, I can't handle any carbs.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Now, I find for myself that what I usually do is I will have 1 or 2 days very low carbs, and then I will eat so many carbs I practically go into a coma. And I will do that in the evening usually it's a day after I worked out, really heavy weightlifting. And I will eat almost to the point where I'm like 400 grams of carbs or something. I'll feel all sweaty, and I'm a little uncomfortable, and I will not feel the best. But when I go to sleep, man, I sleep like I'm dead. It's amazing. I'll wake up the next morning, and I swear that I'm like, if I do that cycle properly after a couple of weeks, I start seeing a six-pack for me.
Yeah.
And I'm a 40-year-old man, so...
Well, that's, it's very, it's funny that people like just ignore the science. All you really need to do is go on the bodybuilder forums. Now, there's a lot of silly, what they call bro science, right? But the basic things, those guys know how to build muscle and shed fat, right? And they aren't on low carb, high fat diets, so it's really silly. But again, when you want to be low carb, then don't worry about the fat. But I always say eschew added fat. There is no need to dump fat over everything. Here's two things that are like in the whole keto-tardive world. Now, there are valid forms of ketosis, and those are talked about in my Facebook group, and there's a couple groups that I highly recommend. Excuse me, just a quick second. So, there are two fallacies that is propagated far and wide in the keto-tard world. That is that fat is highly satiating. It's the least satiating of all of the macronutrients of protein and carbohydrate, right? So that's the one thing. And the other thing is that it's nutritious. Just go on any of the databases and look up isolated fat. There is no vitamins and minerals. People, it's nutritionally vapid. It is literally white granulated sugar, right? There's a little vitamin E. Butter has a little, but that's not because of the fat portion. That's because of the milk solids, the milk solids within the butter.
But don't worry,
right?
You can fix that by making it into ghee.
Yes, ghee. Yes, right. So you've got something that is twice as energy dense, 9 calories, more than twice as energy dense. And when you start talking about the difference between high protein, where you're only getting 3 to 3 1/4 of each gram of protein, and fat is 9 grams, it's almost 3 times for the same amount same volume, gram by gram, is 3 times the energy. So that's strike one. Then strike two is it has no nutrition value, and then strike three is it's the least satiating, right? So I say don't fear fat, but food comes with fat. Almost all, even a potato has a minuscule bit of fat. If you want to eat a plant that has fat, eat an avocado. That's fine, right? Or you just eat meat, fish, and fowl, and eat them with. You don't need to put a fat. I'm a home cook guy that loves making all kinds of various sauces. My sauces. Every once in a while, there might be a teaspoon or two of butter in it or something, right? A little, if it's a little milk or a little cream, But normally, there's wine and stock reductions, And so so people do all this stuff, you got plenty of fat, and then we're gonna bread it, we're gonna deep fry it for more fat. Then we're gonna put a fat sauce on it, right? And it's like, this is all healthy stuff, right?
But it made sense back in the day when you may not eat anything tomorrow.
Right.
So you feast today with whatever you can, because tomorrow you might not have anything.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So anyway, any other questions along those?
The last thing I was curious about was fasting. When I say that getting on the paleo diet saved my life, a big part of that was fasting.
I did a lot of it too.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And my problem was I couldn't digest anything. And fasting allowed my stomach to heal. And I was doing, week-long fasts with a week of super intense. I had to actually add in all that extra fat for a week because I would fast for a whole week.
Well, it can't for acute fasts like that, even lengthy ones. It's my opinion that, and I've read a lot of the stuff. There's a lot of old books too, because fasting used to be a big thing way back. It was seen as something, as almost a cure-all, right? And so I see the value in it. I've gotten too many anecdotal reports that it's way different for women than for men.
Yes.
And I would give caution for women. You know, it's okay to skip a meal every now and then, but you don't want to get into eating disorder sort of chronic fasting, right? I think the guys can handle it a lot better. And the other thing is that if you do have a gut dysbiosis, typically that's created by the fact that you have too many nefarious strains of bacteria, or not too many, but they're at too high a population, right? And so fasting sometimes can lower those populations so that when you begin eating fibers again, the good guys are keeping those in check, because it's not like you don't have any E. coli in your system, and you might even have slight bit of C. diff, the big killer one, but it's the good stuff that keeps everything in check. So
and there is some theories too that we might need some of these so-called bad bacteria in very minute quantities in the right part of the digestive tract.
Because they keep the good ones at high populations, because the good ones, it's like nuclear war and chemical war down there all at the same time, right?
And if you eat Mexican food, you really understand that nuclear war part.
Yeah. So that's when I was losing my weight, I was fasting twice a week. But I did some mistakes. I was doing them prior to my workout at the gym, so I would train fasted. Since then, I've come to realize that's probably not a good idea. That you should be taking in proper nutrition during that time. I still did okay. I'm just saying
you have to be careful. You don't
less than optimal. It's less than optimal.
You have to be careful. You don't. I ended up. I did intermittent fasting and trained every morning, fasted, and I had a very small eating window. Now I was eating the correct amount of calories. Actually, I probably eaten a little more.
Are you doing 18.5 or something like that?
Yeah, well, I ate everything between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So, yeah, about 4 hours. And that was all good and well until I got lean. Not long after I got lean, and I built quite a bit of muscle, I got adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
Partially, I was also very, very low carb most of the time. Right. When I started doing those carb spikes again, that's helped my adrenals come back as well.
Yeah. There you go. Anything else?
No, I think that was great. That was a wonderful conversation.
Okay, so we wrap it here. I guess. Well, you're gonna edit it up anyway. When will you have it up?
Well, I'm going to do the outro now, and then I'm going to stop the recording. And since the beginning went perfectly fine, I'll post it just the way it is.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Richard.
Yeah,
if you want to
you didn't have to do anything. Yeah, that was good. We should come up with some subjects to do it again. So maybe next time I host you and publish it on my YouTube, right? So we can get some of that cross promotion stuff going. But once it comes up on YouTube, and I assume you're going to do a post on SMB 4K. And so once those are up, then I will promote it through my Facebook, Twitter, everything, and also I'll do a blog post first, and then promote both your post, the YouTube, and my blog post out there as well. So
excellent. Thank you, Richard. Very good. I'm going to do the outro now. Thank you.
Okay.
And you can see more about Richard on freetheanimal.com. The link will be below as well in the description for this video. Thank you very much for listening to this video. If you found the information useful for you, please subscribe, join us on smv4k.com, and share this message on your social media. You can get the real magic with one-on-one coaching. That's where you can have real progress and you can get personalized help for your needs. Please also check us out on Patreon and support us using the links below.